tackling tough topics to help you think reasonably about life's most important issues. This is Thinker Sensitive. Welcome to Thinker Sensitive. My name is Ryan Ragazine, and I am the host of the Thinker Sensitive podcast. This episode is coming a little bit later in the week. My wife and I just got back into town from Detroit, Michigan yesterday, and so I'm running just a tad behind. But better late than never, right? Let's jump right in today. In the 1960s, Ole Miss was a racially segregated university. James Meredith, a native of Mississippi, had the dream to attend his home state school and be the first African American to enroll at Ole Miss. His desire to attend the University of Mississippi was met with a lot of backlash. It created great tension in the state and on the campus of Ole Miss. On September 10th, 1962, the U.S. Supreme Court ruled that Meredith was to be admitted to the university and enrolled in classes. But this wouldn't go down without a fight. The governor of Mississippi at the time, Ross Barnett, tried to prevent Meredith's enrollment by playing the role of registrar and blocking his admission. On September 30th, a deal was reached between Barnett and U.S. Attorney General Robert Kennedy to allow James to enroll. After troops and U.S. Marshals were sent in to ensure Meredith's protection, a violent and deadly riot broke out on campus. A mob of angry college students, natives of Mississippi, and citizens of the country confronted U.S. Marshals stationed on campus. The crowd assaulted the marshals with bricks and bullets outside the university's administration building. The riots didn't cease until the arrival of federal troops finally quelled the violence in the early morning. 2 bystanders died in the confrontation. 206 marshals and soldiers were wounded, and 200 people were arrested. On October 1st, 1962, James Meredith was finally allowed to register for classes. While at Ole Miss, he experienced constant threats and harassment from fellow students. In spite of all of these challenges, Meredith graduated with a bachelor's degree in August 1963, and he went on to earn his LL.B. in 1968 from Columbia Law School. A civil rights activist, a businessman, a politician, and an author, Meredith has dedicated his life to supporting civil rights and promoting social justice. In addition to being the first African American to attend the University of Mississippi, Meredith is also noted for leading the 1966 March Against Fear from Memphis, Tennessee to Jackson, Mississippi. When Meredith was shot by a sniper on the second day of the march, civil rights leaders, including Martin Luther King Jr., stepped in to complete the march that James had begun. The story of James Meredith is a powerful representation of justice in action, of the enactment of justice in society. When we hear the word justice, many of us immediately and intuitively think of stories like these. We think about issues of social justice. As important as these issues are, and they are very important, in this podcast, I'd like to bring attention to a couple other forms of justice that are also quite important and quite fundamental. Justice in thinking and justice in communication. 2 things that are so closely related to one another that it's hard to separate them in order to evaluate them individually and on their own terms. Thinker Sensitive is a podcast that is centered heavily on the idea of justice, but not so much on the concrete enactment of justice in society through activism, but on justice in thought and speech, which is just as important as activism. And I would argue even more fundamental and foundational. Justice in these contexts revolves around two main things: truth and fairness. To be just is to give truth priority and primacy in our lives. Justice entails, even demands, that truth itself gets priority over what's convenient, what helps me sleep at night, what fulfills my wishes and desires, what conforms to my needs, and what I personally want to be true. Justice demands that truth is prioritized over self. Truth isn't something to be played with. It's not something that can be manipulated. It's not malleable. Truth simply is, whether I like it or not. The Pulitzer Prize winning play, Cat on a Hot Tin Roof by Tennessee Williams, illustrates this point vividly and powerfully. The play is about the human tendency for denial and delusion in the face of inconvenient truths. Like with the various characters in Tennessee Williams' acclaimed play, most of us would rather live in mendacity, a key word in the play, than confront the realities of our lives and our world. But at the end of the day, truth isn't predicated upon our feelings. It just is. In one of the final scenes of Cat on a Hot Tin Roof, Big Daddy is forced to learn this quickly. As the truth of cancer, the harsh and sad truth of cancer, doesn't care how we feel about it. Truth should also be prioritized over family and blood relations. You've heard the phrase, blood is thicker than water. Many people believe that the truth of family overrides moral and ethical truth. The song Jimmy Sparks off the Lumineers' third album highlights the pitfalls of this us versus them mentality quite well. Out on the road, they caught a stranger in the lights. His thumb was up, and his son asked if the man was all right. Jim said, "You never give a hitcher a ride, 'cause it's us or them." It was 3 a.m. Oh my love, could you spare my blood? Spare my blood. Later on, the song continues, now Jimmy's son is trying to make his way home. His graveyard shift had ended, and it was starting to snow. He sees an old man walking barefoot alone. It was 3 a.m. This old man waved his hands with tears in his eyes. But Jimmy's son just sped up and remembered Daddy's advice. No, you don't ever give a hitcher a ride, 'cause it's us or them, 'cause it's me or him. Truth should also eclipse friendships. Our loyalty to truth should eclipse the sense of loyalty that we have to our friends. Friends should be able to tell us the truth, and they also should be able to receive the truth. If they can't, we might question the truth of their friendship. Truth should be given primacy over tribe as well. Regardless of what you may have thought about Dave Chappelle's most recent Netflix special, which was highly controversial, I was actually impressed by the fact that the National Black Justice Coalition took a stand against Dave, because in doing so, they were swimming against the current of racial tribalism. Justice demands that truth also be prioritized over political affiliations. Partisanship creates such a strong bias that naturally clouds our thinking and prevents us from seeing the whole picture. The national media coverage of the riots of 2020 serve as a great example of this. These riots led to several deaths, thousands of arrests and injuries, and billions of dollars in property damage. Many liberal news sources only focused on violence by extremist right-wing groups and downplayed the significance of violence from left-wing groups, while conservative news outlets seemed to only focus on violence from the left. During that time, I had to continually juxtapose articles from both sides in order to find some semblance of truth. I have to say, this is an absolute travesty and a complete embarrassment to mainstream media and contemporary journalism, where partisanship continually outweighs the sincere pursuit of truth, and utilitarianism reigns supreme. But don't let the facts get in the way of a good story. Truth should also be elevated above religious tradition. Christian denominations serve as a good example of this. In my opinion, there are many denominations and church traditions that teach things that are not in line with the criterion of Christ, the central standard of truth for the Christian. Finally, truth should also be prioritized over country. Speaking from a Christian perspective, the Pledge of Allegiance is a good example. Conservative evangelicals have a hard time with this one. But their Christ was not an American. He was not a nationalist. He was not a military leader. He was a personal pacifist. He believed in self-sacrifice over self-preservation. And he demanded total allegiance to himself over against all other allegiances, including to one's country. For the Christian, God and country should not be on the same level. The other component of justice in this context is fairness, which can be defined as impartiality and freedom from favoritism and bias. Many of the allegiances and loyalties that we just mentioned create natural bias and favoritism. We see this in the context of relationships. We give our friends and family members a level of leniency that we simply don't give to outsiders. We're gracious to our friends, but unforgiving to our enemies. We give our family members the benefit of the doubt, but we don't give others the same courtesy. We selectively find the good in our friends, whereas we only see the bad in our enemies. We see this in the sporting world as well. Oftentimes, when a great player from a rival team falls into some kind of scandal, we instantly demonize the player and shame the entire team and organization. But when one of our favorite players from our favorite team falls into a scandal, we defend them ad nauseum and make excuses for them. Fairness is also related to charity and equity. This has to do with how we interpret information and how we communicate information. Anytime someone is misrepresented, it is an injustice. Anytime someone's words are misconstrued and taken out of context, it's an injustice. This type of unfairness is very common today, and it's often driven by partisanship and personal bias. Let me give an example involving LeBron James. Quick preface: I'm not a fan of LeBron. As a Pistons fan, he's always come off as a whiner who receives all-star treatment and gets a bunch of unjust and unfair calls because he complains to the refs so much. Yes, I'm a bitter and resentful Pistons fan. But I once overheard someone say that LeBron was super racist because of a comment that he had made when he was younger. So I looked it up to see if what this person said was true. A Reuters article, one of the most centrist, nonpartisan news outlets around today, from June of 2020, helps to clear things up. Suffice to say, the quote that this person was alluding to was completely taken out of context. Labeling LeBron as a racist who hates white people is simply unfair and uncharitable. Almost as unfair as the favorable treatment LeBron's been getting from the refs since entering the league. But this is what we do. We misrepresent people that we don't like, sometimes subconsciously and sometimes consciously. And guess what? It's a form of unfairness and a form of injustice. And oftentimes, we're just revealing our own biases. I often wonder how many people really care about truth, or if our personal agendas simply eclipse all else. I often wonder how many people really care about fairness, or if we only care about equity when it relates to and affects us personally. It's not easy to be just in our thinking and our communication. It's not easy to be truthful and fair. I believe that we get these ideals and values from God, the only being who is perfectly just, truthful, and fair. To think justly and communicate justly, to embody these values, is to participate with the Spirit of God in the world. The same Spirit that worked in and through James Meredith, a man who always understood himself as being on a mission from a just God to enact justice in the world. Thinking justly and communicating justly are every bit as important as activism and social justice, as all of these forms of justice reflect and embody the truthfulness and fairness of a just God. As always, thanks so much for listening, and we'll see you next time. This episode, and all episodes of Thinker Sensitive, are available at thinkersensitive.com, iTunes, Spotify, and more. If you enjoy our content and wish to donate to help us grow our online community of thinkers, please visit thinkersensitive.com.